It's time to talk Las Vegas Raiders football on the Our Lads Football Network. The NFL draft is over for 2022, and this is the very first of many post draft interviews with top analysts who cover their respective teams. And sometimes we're lucky enough to get them that they're actually in the same city. And that's one Case Keefer, who's the sports editor, assistant sports editor, actually, and writer for the Las Vegas Sun, who covers the Raiders. Good to talk to you, Case, for the first time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Greg. Yeah, exciting time with the draft just wrapping up locally. That was a pretty crazy
That's
experience.
right, yeah. By the way, I came dressed to the party because I have my Star Wars, my Stormtrooper shirt.
Oh yeah, for the Death Star. Yeah, it
Yes, I
took me a
figured
second, but
if
yeah.
I'm gonna ever wear this on one of my shows, this is the only show that makes sense. So,
Sure.
how was it? How was the draft being in town?
I mean, it was wild. I think it lived up to expectations. They shut down a portion of the strip. Of course, it was held, behind Caesar's Forum and in the high roller observation wheel. It seemed like the NFL loved it. I don't think there were any complaints. It seemed like everything was laid out well. Big crowds. Maybe I've heard some rumblings since that the crowds weren't as big as they expected. But it still seemed like that didn't really deter anything. Maybe it gave people more room. So I'd say all in all, it was a successful first foray into Vegas for the draft.
Now, what are the comparisons as far as how the fans have taken in the area to the Raiders compared to the hockey team, especially since the hockey team had that incredible first season, which is just, that's almost a storybook first season, even though we know football is a much more popular sport. So how's the comparison been?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It kind of depends on who you ask, and it is certainly it's different with the Golden Knights having come here as a expansion franchise and how good they were the first year and some other things really I think tied them to the community so much, and they're just so beloved here. I don't think the Raiders have quite gotten to that level. I mean, that being said, though, I mean, all their numbers are huge. Ratings wise, people are watching the games. The stadium, with a couple exceptions, has been really really full and rocking. It seems like it's been an overwhelming success. With that being said, if you just land in Vegas and you drive around, even if you just drive to your hotel, you're going to see a ton of Golden Knights license plates, stickers, jerseys,
Okay,
whatever. I mean, you'll probably see like 10 of those before you see any Raiders. Of
interesting.
course, that can change maybe if they're super successful
Sure.
coming up. But
Yeah.
someone the other day told me, which I thought was funny. They said they compared the Raiders to Celine Dion. She's just a residency here for right now. It doesn't really seem like they're as beloved as the Golden Knights, which of course their big phrase was Vegas born. I think it'll change over the years. But right now, the Raiders, I think there's interest, but it's not. I don't feel like the whole city's living and dying with whether they win or lose.
Yeah, and I can understand that. You have to think that the fans are probably wondering, okay, when are they going to leave next? But knowing now where Vegas is starting to become, as far as a big city, like again, it's not going to be like California. We understand that, like LA and some of the other places that the Raiders franchise has called home. But you get the feeling they're going to be in Vegas for a very long time.
Yeah, certainly. And like I said, I think it'll change with the generations. And this isn't to say anything of the Raiders fan base. I mean, the Raiders still have a crazy fan base, as
That's
you know,
right.
all around the country, and so many people are bought into the team. I think locally, maybe it's just the diehard nature. I think might be a little less right now than it is certainly in portions of California and maybe elsewhere too.
All right, let's talk NFL draft first of all. And the Raiders obviously did not have a pick until round 3 because of the blockbuster Davante Adams trade. How quickly did that trade transpire within the media and the fan base? Like was it something like, oh, we're hearing whispers for the past month or two, or did it happen very quickly?
Well, I mean, to me, it seems like we heard whispers for half the year. This is something that Raiders fans, at least, were talking about just dating back to the middle of last season. You kind of saw the dominoes fall. I mean, Davante Adams and Derek Carr have always been very open with how close they are. I think they both called each other best friends, and they both said they wanted to play together. So, a lot of the fans saw the situation that, Davante Adams, of course, being on the franchise tag. the Raiders having a hole at receiver. I mean, the fans were just relentless about this from middle of the year. We're going to get Davante. This is going to happen. And, I think a lot of the media, myself included, were kind of trying to pump the brakes on it. Like, I don't know, that's a lot. It's a lot of connecting dots. Davante Adams obviously was in a great situation as it looked like things were progressing positively for Aaron Rodgers with the Packers. I thought it was looking less and less likely, but I think the seeds were kind of planted, and then everything that happened with the Raiders having a new power structure coming in, Davante Adams wanting out. I think it moved pretty quickly once it did get into the offseason, but this was something that was lingering and people were talking about for a really long time, probably more than I realize, more than I think national people realize. I mean, the Raiders fans were just yelling for this all year, and ultimately it happens, and a great deal of excitement. I think the 3 years in Vegas, this is by far the most excited I feel like the fan base has been going into a season, and largely because of Davante Adams.
And then how about the coaching change too? Because they really fought hard to get into the playoffs. They got very fortunate, no question, but they made some big, they capitalized with some big wins down the stretch. As a fan, it must have been just so exciting to see them win some of those games, to get in at the last possible, minute. And they in a pretty decent playoff game, losing to the eventual AFC champs. And then the coaching change. Where the fans now, I could see the players and I could see some fans being a little bit like, well, you didn't give him a chance. And, it's not like we've been to the postseason every year, so it's like, hey, we finally get there. Now you get rid of the coach, just Josh McDaniels. He hasn't done anything. He was with Denver, our rivals, and he screwed that up. Are they a little bit more like, hey, you know what, especially after the draft and the acquisition of Davante Adams, kind of feeling that, maybe this is really was the smart move. We've got the right two guys in charge, and we've got a really good, bright future ahead.
Yeah, I think right now the approval rating is through the roof, and of course that all goes back to Davante Adams.
Okay.
And that was just something so many people wanted. I think, man, I haven't relitigated the coaching search in a while. It seems like there's always so much going on with the Raiders, but I think it might have been a little more split then. I think ultimately maybe slightly more people saw the reasons to move on. I mean, it was hard to do with what Rich Bisaccia did coming in, keeping the team together, getting them to the playoffs, like you said, but that being said, I kind of saw it both ways too. He did make some mistakes as head coach. He was a beloved player coach. Everyone got along with him a lot, but there were some things on game day that were baffling. And I know he was growing. He was thrust into this situation.
Sure.
Maybe Mark Davis didn't see him as the guy to take him to the next level. But I think kind of the Bengals game that they lost to in the first round was kind of the last straw. I mean, it's easy to forget now with the run the Bengals went on, but the Raiders were so close in that game. I mean, it came down to a fourth down pass that Derek Carr, for some reason, threw short of the end zone. But they made just some huge gaffes in that game that didn't make them look like a well-coached team. And with how close that game was coming down to the last play, you switch one of those, they're moving on to the next round and going to Tennessee, where who knows? We saw what Cincinnati did there. So I think the way the Cincinnati game ended up really kind of sealed Bisaccia's fate, even though it kind of held on for a little longer. And then I will say, when McDaniels and Ziegler first came in, there was a little bit of hesitancy to embrace them. And then it was like the ship was sunk after 2 days of free agency. They did nothing. People were blowing up. We're tanking. What is with these guys? I think Dave Ziegler, the general manager, joked that he'd seen some of the memes passing around that he was a clown, and he saw how hated he was. But little do they know they're working on clearing space and getting ready for Davante Adams. So it's just funny. I know that's the nature of the NFL and fans, but it has been very up and down. That they hated the power structure for a few days, but now super excited going into the season.
And one more before we move on to the draft. That's Derek Carr. What kind of relationship has he had with the fans?
I would say pretty polarizing, honestly.
That's why I asked it. I can imagine.
I feel it does feel like most of the people don't have, aren't really in the middle, which is where I think you probably should be with him. I mean, he's been a very good quarterback. I would say underrated in terms of his production and what he's done. If you just look at from a numerical perspective, now of course it all comes down to wins, and they haven't won enough with him. 8 years under behind center. 2 playoff berths, but it hasn't had a playoff win. Got hurt before he could play in the first year. So there's some people that shout out all that, and I kind of agree with that. But at the same time, he hasn't won enough games. So then there's the people on the other side that can't get past. Sometimes his awareness isn't the best. He's made some bloopers over the year that I feel like he might be unfairly remembered for. Then you have people screaming he's not the guy because of that. I will say. Again, every answer comes back to Davante Adams, but I think it's moving more in his direction because I think Raiders fans realize, there's no way Davante Adams is in silver and black if it wasn't for Derek Carr. That's ultimately what brought him here. One of the reasons, but I think because of the offseason they've had, people are more excited for Carr going into the season. But it was a big debate what they were going to do with him this offseason. We saw the quarterback market. They could have traded him. He was going into the final year of his deal. So it depends who you ask. And this season's going to play a big role in that. If he struggles with all the weapons he has this year, I think it's going to be right back to square one of people arguing about him. But right now, I think they're satisfied, but not necessarily totally sold as a whole.
Okay, well, let's start then with their first pick, which was their pick in round 3. And actually, their first of 2 offensive linemen that they picked up, Dylan Parham from Memphis. And they also wound up picking up Thayer Munford in round 7. And our lads had Munford as a 4th-round grade. So Munford seemed to be a steal for Vegas later on. Parham, meanwhile, and I'm going to use this to my advantage in case anybody has yet to pick one up. It's not too late. This is the Our Lads 2020 NFL Draft Guide. The Draft Review Guide comes out in a couple of months, so keep that in mind, ourlads.com. And as far as the take on Parham, and by the way, Parham's grade it was basically only, if you could see it here in the Our Lads book, Parham's grade is here, and then all you have to do is skip 1 and then 2 for Munford. So it's like Parham, Munford. They're right next to each other, yet one was drafted in the 3rd round, one in the 7th. Anyway, Parham, a 4-year starter, versatile, plays right, can play tackle, can play guard, even played some center at the Senior Bowl. And our lad says he can be a backup for the interior spots with the long-term possibility of molding into a starter. He is a former tight end, so you can see the reason why he might need a little bit more time. And then Munford's also a 4-year starter who's a versatile performer and was a first-team Big Ten the last 2 years at 2 different positions. So they got 2 versatile linemen in this draft.
Yeah, and I think that was the most important spot for them to address. Certainly, if I was in Dave Ziegler's spot, I would have taken an offensive lineman first. You go back to last year, the biggest issue with this team was the offensive line. They couldn't block anyone. And then they didn't really do anything in the offseason or pre-draft to address that. Obviously, they hit some other needs. So maybe there's some guys on the roster they're still confident in. But, the only 2 players on the line that we saw have a decent year last year were center Andre James and left tackle Colton Miller, who's really good. I think the centerpiece of that line. But yep. I think they needed to address that. They felt like they found their guy in Parham. I think the versatility you mentioned, he's played basically every offensive line position. If you go through his time at Memphis, through the Senior Bowl, that drew them to him, as did his athleticism. They like that a lot. It sounds like, at least at first, they're just going to try him out at the interior spots. They wouldn't say for sure which one they're going to ultimately go with. Maybe they see him as a center answer to Andre James. It's always interesting when a new staff comes in, what they think of these holdover players. I thought James had a great year last year, got a lot better. Like I said, I would pencil him in as one starter, but it kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit when they said they're going to play him at both center and guard, see where he stands. I think he has more of a chance to make an immediate impact at guard. The Raiders still have questions at tackle, though, too. I guess that's where Munford will be. They did a ton of work on Munford. Munford, one of his visits was one of the Raiders' top 30 visits was used on him. I had seen a lot that he was a 4th-round pick, too. I actually listed him as a potential target for the Raiders. He was a guy I liked looking at coming into the draft. So I think in the 7th round, from all I can tell, he looked like a steal as well. And these are 2 guys in here that I think are landed in a really good situations. Like I said, the Raiders have issues at offensive line. I think you only have one guy who is for sure, top of the line, and then James, maybe you put him in there. They're going to be able to compete for playing time. I think you look at them most likely going to come into the season as backups, but one injury away from getting thrust in, and who knows, maybe if they even have good training camps, they can compete for a starting spot. So I think if you're an offensive lineman, you're happy to land with the Raiders, and I think they found what look like 2 good ones in the draft here.
Okay, so Leatherwood, who was drafted with the former regime, And he was never going to have a good season anyway because he's just a rookie. Rookies, unless they're like going to be future all pros that quickly, it just doesn't happen. So he wasn't going to have a great season, and he didn't. But was there anything that you saw? Let's forget about first round grade. I mean, first round where he landed, especially with the new regime. Do you think he still is going to be one of those guys that is going to compete for a starting spot?
He's certainly going to have the chance to compete. Right now, though, if I was betting on who was actually going to start, he might be a slight underdog, honestly. It's hard to tell. I mean, these guys have really danced around the topic, both Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels. You kind of understand that. They haven't seen him on the field. They have been working around the facility, but, they haven't even had OTAs start yet. I think it's more likely they keep him at guard. Of course, last year, Alex Leatherwood started at tackle. It was kind of an unmitigated disaster. I think he was like the worst rated tackle in the league before they switched him to guard. Went to guard. Now there's kind of a logjam there now, though. There's Jermaine Illuminor, who lost his spot at guard last year, too, but he was a Patriots guy originally. He's worked with Josh McDaniels before. They extended him. You think they'd be looking at him having a starting spot, and they have Denzel Good coming back, who tore his ACL before the season last year. So it looks like Good and Illuminor maybe would be the favorites for those spots, but maybe if Leatherwood impresses, if he shows he's made some improvements, he'll have a chance. They could also move him back to tackle. They just haven't said what they want to do. They kind of have a hole at right tackle. They re-signed Brandon Parker, which was somewhat of a surprise, but maybe they see Leatherwood back at right tackle, think he can do something. I think it is unfair to judge him, specifically off 1 year, like you said, the struggles of rookie lineman. But that being said, it was – there's no exaggeration when you talk about how bad it was. He really, really struggled. I mean, penalties, getting pushed back, wasn't good in pass, but he really didn't do anything well. It was more than just having a rough rookie year. It was I think it's fair to say, disastrous. I'm not ready to say he's not going to be a productive NFL player. He could make a leap, but I think right now, with what happened last year in mind, with a new coaching staff coming in, he's going to be able to compete for a spot, but I wouldn't pencil him in right now if I was making my projected draft.
And John Simpson also hasn't really, even though he played pretty much all season, kind of underwhelming. So was Brandon Parker. So that does leave the opportunity, unless the team goes out and signs one of these veteran right tackles, because there's still a handful of veteran tackles that are available in the free agent market. So that's still a possibility. But if that doesn't happen, I think both of these rookies have an opportunity to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of surprised with the Brandon Parker re-signing. He was another guy that I think former third-round pick that just never quite developed into what the Raiders saw him as. That being said, he did play a lot last year. It got better as the season went on, so maybe the new regime sees him as someone that can be useful. The Raiders do have some money coming on the cap on June 1st from some of their cuts. I believe they cut Carl Nassib, Corey Littleton, and Nick Kwiatkowski. So they're going to have some money to play with if some of these guys are lingering. Maybe right tackle is one spot they're looking to address with that. They also still have a hole at linebacker, maybe even secondary. So they're going to have some options of how they can use this extra cap they haven't come their way. But I think right tackle definitely would be in the conversation for one spot they could use that on.
Okay, now, with their the first fourth round pick, they went with Zamir White from Georgia. And there's no questioning Zamir White's talent. The main question is figuring out whether or not he's going to stay healthy. And I thought the fourth round was a perfect spot for him to go, because I think if he has no injury history, I think he's potentially a second round draft pick. That's how talented he is. But the Raiders were able to get him in the fourth round. I'm not really sure what they were thinking with the seventh round pick with running back Britton Brown. I mean, the last 2 years combined, he's got just over 1,100 yards rushing and 11 touchdowns. I don't see him as a returner, so I don't know if they feel like maybe special teams. But round 7 for a running back that has underwhelming numbers, not really sure. They must know, obviously, what they see in the guy. You tell me. But does that move for White have any sort of impact at all on the future of Josh Jacobs?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I had about the same reaction to you on both picks. I think the Zamir White pick is definitely tied to Josh Jacobs. They're not going to come out and say that, but I think that the day before they took Zamir White, they announced they weren't exercising the fifth-year option on Josh Jacobs. So he will be a free agent at the end of next year. I think you look at the old coaching staff, they still had kind of a more old-fashioned philosophy where I think when they drafted Jacobs, and it certainly worked out that first year, they saw him as being like the bell horse back that's going to be in the whole game. He's going to be in every down back. And, now you see McDaniels come in. I think he's more, from the Bill Belichick school of we're going to have a bunch of running backs. And maybe that explains why they took 2 in the draft. I was also really surprised by the Britton Brown pick. I thought they had other holes to fill. That being said, it was pick 250. The draft was winding down, so maybe they had a really high grade on him. I can't give them too much of a hard time on that, but that did really surprise me. The thing I would say is all these veteran backs they have coming back, Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs, even they signed Brandon Bolden. I believe all those guys are on 1-year deals. So maybe at the end of this year or have 1 year left on their deal, I should say. At the end of this year, maybe they do see White and Brown developing into a core they can go with into next year. White, they traded up to get him, so I think they were comfortable with his medicals. I agree with you. I think he was a great. So fun to watch at Georgia. Was a real difference maker. Of course, I think he was better than James Cook, who went 2 rounds ahead of him. I think that largely had to do with medicals and probably some of his thing in the passing game. But Brown also, I think, is good in the passing game. So you look at White and Brown, they kind of complement each other. So maybe you're looking a year down the road. Maybe the Raiders are going into 2023 with those as 2 of their complementary backs, and then another third down back, maybe like Brandon Bolden. So I think this all had to do with long-term, them looking at not wanting to tie up a lot of resources into Josh Jacobs, into running back in general. I don't necessarily think it's a hit against Jacobs, but I just don't think that's the philosophy of these guys to be tying up a lot of money in the running back position, which we've seen a lot of teams in the NFL go to, and I think the Raiders now for the first time are kind of fitting with that trend.
Okay, so that basically would have answered my question. So it's not that they don't think that Jacobs is a quality NFL back and they're going to be happy to have him on the team this year. It's just that he's probably going to want more money that they're going to want to spend for a running back. So go ahead and just let him go out there in the free agent market. And if he gets it, okay. If not, if he has to settle for what we can afford to give him, then fine, but we're not going to overpay for him.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what it is. The interesting part will be he's kind of trended down the last 2 years. Now, I still think Josh Jacobs does a lot of good things that people, might not realize as much. He's a great a pass blocker, picking stuff up. He does all the little things well, but from a running perspective, he's never really matched the heights of his rookie year. A lot of that has to do with the offensive line, but it's going to be. But what's going to be interesting is if he does have a great year this year with the way the offense is looking up. Maybe that puts some pressure on the Raiders if he has a Pro Bowl type season. I don't necessarily think they'll be swayed, but I think that's something to watch. He's still going to be the leading back, the guy who's in the majority of the snaps for them, but a lot's going to see what he does this year. And if he can stay healthy, he had a lot of injuries last year that kind of derailed him as well.
Yeah, and again, like you said, I'm sure the offensive line can't help in that department either. Now let's move on to the next 2 picks, which were between round 4 and round 5, which are actually the last 2 picks we're going to talk about that were in the Raiders draft for 2022. Neil Farrell and Matthew Butler. And so what's interesting about both of these tackles, it's also very similar to what I was just saying with the offensive line. And that is the fact, matter of fact, if you look here, let me make sure I have it on here, get this out of the way. So have it here. There's Matthew Butler, who is actually graded just ahead of Neil Farrell. So they're next to each other. Butler was a 5th-round draft pick, yet had a 3rd-round grade. So they basically add 2 interior defenders to the team. And just quickly see what our lads has to say here. Calling Matthew Butler the ringleader to a deep, talented defensive line. He led the line in tackles for 3 straight seasons and was the 2nd leading sack artist in 21. He was moved throughout the defensive line, everywhere from nose tackle to defensive end. He projects best to a 3-technique role. And then you have Farrell, a big-time power presence inside that can hold the point of attack, controlling 2 gaps with his use of leverage and ability to attach himself to the ground. A 2-gap run defender who's feisty and competitive. So Neil Farrell and Matthew Butler, it was obvious by going with those guys back-to-back that the Raiders wanted to take care of, I guess, an issue that they felt they had in the interior of the defensive front.
Yeah, I thought these were 2 good picks back to back. Another 2 guys I labeled going into the draft, not to pat myself on the back.
All right, there you go.
There so it was pretty crazy with Munford.
Did you walk into the office the next day and ask for a contract extension?
Yeah, exactly. I should have, but I really like these two guys, and I think they're pretty complimentary of each other. It sounds like you guys nailed it in the draft guide. It seems like Butler may be more of your interior pass rusher. It would be his strengths, and then Farrell's really good filling holes, space clogger, big guy. Butler really had a huge year this final year at Tennessee. I think that the Raiders brass saw that and were kind of thinking about his potential even further down the road. And this was an area where they certainly needed help. Maybe running back might have been a little baffling to people since they had all those running backs on their roster and now they have such a logjam there. But defensive line, it would have been a surprise if they didn't use at least one pick in the draft on that. And using two, I think it is totally fine. Get two swings on two guys that look like they could have high upside. Farrell, profiles perfectly in what you would want for a 3-4 nose tackle in Patrick Graham's system. So we'll see how he works out. We'll see how Butler does. I like both of them, and I think they're going to have a chance to earn some playing time, get in the rotation immediately this year.
So this is definitely going to be, and when you get a new coach in, they always ask the coach, okay, you're going to move us to a 3-4 or a 4-3, and with the Raiders it's a 3-4. But then they always, it's always the same thing. Well, but we're not going to play that base all the time, and there's going to be flexibility, blah 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 blah. Because I find it interesting because our lads with the depth charts, they have. Because the Raiders, it's looking like it's going to be a base 3-4, so we have to have the depth chart look like Max Crosby's playing the 3-4 outside linebacker, as is Chandler Jones. But in actuality, that's not really going to be the case. So that does mean that I think we're going to see a lot of versatility on this defensive line until they probably get a couple more years into the system that they're looking to adapt with Graham, as long as he's there for the next few years. But to have Chandler Jones and Max Crosby on the team at the same time is definitely going to boost the pass rush right away in year one under Patrick Graham.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. That's exactly what Graham said. He says, we're not a 3-4. We're not running. He went through the usual spiel, but every move they've made this offseason seems to fit with them running something similar to what he's done with the Giants the past few years and the Dolphins before that with the 3-4 base. I think there's reason for excitement, though. The Raiders defense has been long struggling. Last year they did take a step up, although I still think they were, at best around average in the league, but they did some good things under Gus Bradley. It's funny now; it's a complete 180. It looks like Patrick Graham's system for everything we've heard about it, and what it looks like from their moves. It looks like it's going to be totally different than Gus Bradley's, 4-3 cover 2, kind of stick to the same thing as last year. I do believe they're going to be, a lot of multiple looks, a lot of different things. But like you said, a starting point with Crosby and Jones, you can't do much better than that. I think there's reason for excitement with this Raiders defense, and I think there's a good chance it's the best it's been in the past 10, 15 years, and they can build on what they did last year.
Yeah, and look, we're going to have an opportunity to talk before the season begins, hopefully, as long as you return my phone call, my email, and or my Twitter text, and so we'll have an opportunity to go over the entire team and the free agent moves. Rock Ya-Sin, obviously, that was a key trade, but I want to ask you a few other things when I'm taking a look at this depth chart. What about Clelin Ferrell? What's the deal there? Was he just, again, another player that was probably overdrafted and therefore he gets this knock on him, or is he just a player that is just not as good? Even if he was drafted late first round, that wouldn't have been any good. Has he underperformed, or do you think there's a role with him on this new team?
I mean, for sure, he was overdrafted. There's no question about that. Taking him so high, still kind of baffling. That being said, I thought he had a really good second year. Their first year in Las Vegas in 2020, when he still was starting at one of the edge rusher spots. He did miss some games. I think he had a lengthy COVID diagnosis, got pretty sick. I think he missed 2 games from that. I think he got injured another time, but he was really a difference maker when he was in there. I remember the crazy game they won against the Jets with the Hail Mary at the end of the game. I think he had 2 turnovers in that game. He looked like the best player on the field sometimes, and that really wasn't that uncommon in 2020. I thought, he's never going to be a fan favorite, or, people were still griping about where they took him, but I really thought he was rounding into something good. Then we come back the next year, and he was basically a forgotten guy by all what it looked like. It looked like he'd kind of fallen out of favor with John Gruden. they went out and got Yannick Ngakoue, who immediately was slotted in as the starter next to Max Crosby, even though some people were saying, what? Farrell had a better year than Crosby 2 years ago. It was close, but I think that was true. They tried to use them both in the interior and, as a DN, and I think he just kind of fell out of favor. He was inactive the first game. I don't necessarily know what the new coaching staff thinks of him. They didn't exercise his 5th-year option, but that was no surprise.
Sure.
That being said, I do think he's getting a chance to kind of start from scratch here. There's reasons to believe that he could fit better in kind of this 3-4 system that Patrick Graham would go into. I wouldn't write him off yet. He's never going to live up to being the number 4 overall pick in the draft, but I still think there's a path to him being a useful player. I took a step down last year with him, being inactive in that game. Like I said, not getting a whole lot of reps, but I thought he was pretty good in 2020, and he could be useful for the Raiders again this year.
All right, let's wrap up by talking about some of the notable free agents that have been signed over the last few days. Some of them actually had draftable grades at our lads. 2 of them are from Ball State. And actually, I think both of these guys were not graded at our lads, but I did enough research myself that they were names that I remember. Justin Hall, who I would guess is going to be there to try to help special teams out, because you talk about a 2-time first-team MAC return specialist. And then Bryce Cosby, also from Ball State, small guy, as you would expect from the MAC, but you're talking about a 2-time first-team MAC defender, a 5th-year senior with over 50 starts, 383 tackles, and a bunch of other good production stats. And it's interesting because when I looked at a lot of these, this handful of notable rookies that were signed, I see high effort, high energy in their descriptions. I also see, which you normally would see, special teams. But those are the 2 guys that kind of popped up to start the list. And you got big play Trey Turner, the receiver for Virginia Tech, who averaged over 17 yards per catch in his career. Another high-effort player and very good on special teams. You got another Taglioa, Amosa from Notre Dame, to his cousin. Another high-energy hustle and grit defender. You've got Darian Butler, an undersized linebacker. You have Sam Webb, a Division II standout, who is a 4-year starter and is supposedly also very good on special teams, has recorded multiple blocks on special teams. So it seems like they had an objective with a lot of these guys, high-energy special teams.
Yeah, that seems right. I think they also did address, a few needs. Maybe there's some guys competing for that. It seems like the last roster spot or 2, always a surprise. Yeah. You never know. So there's some guys with some chances there. I think, among the fan base, they were kind of surprised that they didn't take any linebackers in the draft. That was probably they still have a hole there. So I thought Darian Butler, a guy I'd seen some places had him as an into the draft guy. Who was really productive in college, just a little bit undersized. Maybe he'll fit well here. Of course, their starting guy in the middle is coming off a Pro Bowl season is Denzel Perryman, who, of course, Butler, not on that level even coming out of college, but Perryman kind of had some of the same knocks on him that he's undersized, but has been a sure tackler. Maybe he can take Butler under his wing. That might be the guy I'm looking for the most. Safety, the other position where they needed some help, thought they might address in the draft, and they didn't. You mentioned the Ball State kid Cosby. Maybe he's the other guy who might have a chance, to make a difference if he has a good training camp, and certainly he would fit well on special teams. So, yeah, I think there's some special teams possibilities here, and some guys that maybe they look at that they can develop over the next year or 2.
Okay, so in closing, what's left? Like you said, there's a couple of spots they might have to, or they could possibly look at to sign a veteran before training camp, or maybe even just before the season begins, depending on injuries or if the right player becomes available. Okay, we've addressed the offensive line. Is there any other position that we have not addressed that you think could be a problem?
I'm really interested in what they do at the second safety spot. Trevon Merrick's coming off of a great rookie season. He is implanted as the free safety, but at strong safety, there a lot more questions. Jonathan Abrams coming off of shoulder surgery, and even when healthy, he has not been a very productive player. He was better last year, especially against the run, but He doesn't really look like a match for Patrick Graham's system. I think right now you'd have to say he's the second starting safety, but that would be a big weak point. I think the weakest point of the defense, if that comes to fruition. I do know they signed Duron Harmon, I believe, who a former Patriots guy who's played, been around these guys in the past. I think he started each of the last 2 years on one-year deals with the Falcons and maybe the Lions. So maybe they look at him as the starter. But, as of right now, it seems like there'd be some competition for that spot between Abrams and Harmon. I don't necessarily know that you're super confident in either of those guys. So maybe that's a spot where they're looking to address, bring in some more competition for training camp. They ultimately didn't do it through the draft. But, yeah, I think strong safety is still a little bit of a concern for me. And linebacker, they signed a bunch of guys that, fringe roster guys. We'll have to see what happens there. They could still bring in another linebacker too. So I think safety and linebacker go with offensive line is maybe spots where they could get better.
Yeah, I was a big Morig fan last year. I mean, he was one of my favorites coming out of the draft, and it's great to see that he's playing well. I'm not surprised. All right, my last question is on Bryan Edwards. I have to ask you about him. I picked him up in my Dynasty Fantasy League. And I did that because I really felt that from what I was hearing and just looking at the way he played the year before, that maybe this would be a step up and he'd have his breakout season, and it never happened. There were games where he wasn't even getting a target, it looked like. What happened to Bryan Edwards?
Yeah, he'll have another chance this year. I think he has a problem creating separation.
That's what I heard, yeah.
He had some unbelievable days in training camp, so that's probably what you heard or what made you pick him up. But, even at the time being there at training camp all those days, he was having amazing days because he was making these ridiculous catches over defenders. And I guess that doesn't really translate into the game. It never seemed like he had space really to operate. He was pulling down these balls with people draped all over him. Maybe his route running needs to improve. Maybe he hasn't been as fast as they thought playing style. He's still going to have a chance this year. He might be a starter. He's going to have some competition from Demarcus Robinson, who they signed from the Chiefs. It's an interesting question. He's shown some flashes, but like you said, he's just got to find a way to get more open. I don't think he's been able to do that. Even all the hype when it was coming from, he wasn't really getting open. He was just making crazy catches, and it carried over to the game. So we'll see what work he's done in the offseason. I wouldn't write him off just yet, but for taking him as high as they did, you probably hope to see a little bit more by now.
And I'm not surprised Hunter Renfrow is turning into a really good player. I mean, all you had to do was if you're a college football fan, all you had to do is watch Clemson and their big games and how key he was. I was shocked that when he was available all the way to the 5th round, that Houston didn't draft him, knowing they had Deshaun Watson as the quarterback. I'm like, come on, how can you not put Renfrow? I mean, you got this combination. But yeah, Renfrow, he seems like a perfect Patriot too. So Josh McDaniels must love the fact that this guy's on his team.
Oh, yeah. You look at some of the receivers McDaniels has helped develop and work with over the years. It looks like Renfrow was a perfect match. I always liked him, too. I thought he'd be a productive pro. I don't think I saw coming just how great he was last year. I mean, it was really their go-to guy with all the other injuries and things that happened. Darren Waller missing a lot of times down the stretch. He was just phenomenal. And, if all these guys stay healthy and click in the new system, it's kind of scary to think what they could do. Renfrow, Davante Adams, Darren Waller. That's 3 guys we've seen play at the absolute top level, and you're going to kind of have to pick your poison one way or the other if the Raiders can keep the 3 of them on the field together for a long period of time.
And now they just got to make sure the offensive line can give them enough time to block. So that's
exactly.
All right, excellent, Case. Appreciate your time on the show, and again, like I said, I can't wait to talk to you again before the season begins, because that means the season will be beginning soon. And I can't wait for that to happen, as I'm sure every football fan feels the same way. What are you doing right now for the Las Vegas Sun? Is it still all draft? Are you going to be, because rookie mini camp's coming up and the OTAs and all that kind of stuff, so it's still going to be a lot to report on as far as the draft and the veterans coming back soon?
Yeah, we'll have a few more things coming out of the draft, and then I think it is only 2 weeks or a little less than 2 weeks away when these guys start getting to the headquarters, the Raiders headquarters here, their facility. I think we'll be out there pretty fast to see what they're looking at. I can tell you the first position I'll be gunning for it is offensive line. I got to go see what they're doing on that side. We don't really know the hierarchy or even who's going to be playing well. So. That'll certainly be a big point of something to watch. It's something we cover here in the next couple of weeks.
Great job, Case. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again in a few months.
Okay, thanks a lot.